the minutes. You want to do the review and approve the minutes?
Okay. We will go back and the minutes that were approved for April 20th, 2016 already were the minutes for the Urban Forestry Committee. We'll go to the standard motions for the minutes for the Planning and Zoning Commission for April 20th, 2016. Is there a motion to approve?
Also move.
Been a motion by Mr. Elkin. Is there a second?
Second.
A second. Any discussion? Corrections or additions to those minutes? Being none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried, minutes approved. Thank you, Mr. Hammond. Item 1 then on our regular agenda is a Renaissance Zone. To consider a request for a Renaissance Zone project at 46 First Avenue West. And at this time, I'd ask Mr. Hadley, are you presenting this one?
No, Stephen is.
Stephen.
Yes,
Okay.
we have, the applicant is here this morning to explain the request to the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Okay. Thank you. This time then, let the applicant speak.
Good morning, Chairman.
Morning.
My Renaissance Zone application is for the property at 46 First Avenue West. Many of you may know that as the old Village building. Our plans are to renovate the upstairs west side apartment back to an apartment. It was used for a number of years for retail space and then unused due to the fact that there's no plumbing up there. So that's one part of the project. The other part is to replace all the windows and doors on the property for energy efficiency and replace, at least on the west end of the building, the heating part of it. The building is heated by a boiler system. That will be in place still for the east side of the building, but the west side will be changed over to heating and air. And also kind of take the exterior of the building back to the original. We'll be stripping all the wood off and taking it back to kind of an original look store front on the building.
Christy, do you want to state your name and address just for the record?
Sure. My name is Christy Schwartz. My address is 4148 Highway 22, Dickinson, North Dakota.
Thank you, Chris. Any questions or comments for Ms. Schwartz? Thank you very much.
You bet.
And Mr. Josephson, at this time, I'd ask you to give us your recommendation, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Steve Josephson, City County Planner. As the applicant has presented, this is a request for a Renaissance Zone project and also requested a five-year exemption. The property tax will stay the same over those 5 years. Staff has reviewed this and found that it's met the goals and objectives of the city's Renaissance Zone development plan. One, to gain at least 3 improved structures or new businesses a year, and to foster a culture of progressiveness and change while recognizing the traditions and history of the area, and the restoration of the building to its original entrance. Certainly, and restoring the apartment certainly meets this. It also meets the Renaissance Zone requirement that a commercial property owner must invest at least 50% of the full and true value of the property. The applicant has estimated that the improvements will cost $176,450, and the true value of the property is that much, $176,450, and they estimate the project will cost a little under $165,000, so it meets that requirement. Staff recommends approval. approval of the project, and I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Now, I just needed you to clarify those costs. They're gonna put approximately $264,000 into the project, right?
Correct.
Okay. Is that correct, Ms. Schwartz? Those,
Yes.
that number sound
Yes.
correct? Okay. Okay. And you're gonna spend a little over $264,000 on the project?
352, 353.
Any questions for Mr. Josephson? Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you.
This time I'd ask if there's anyone in the public who'd like to make a comment on this application. Please feel free to come forward, and hear what you're thinking about. Anyone from the commission wish to make further comment? Being none, we'll close public portion of this hearing, and I'd ask for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move the City of Dickinson Planning and Zoning Commission recommend approval of K. Schwartz Properties LLC petition for Renaissance Zone tax exemption as being compliant with the City of Dickinson's Renaissance Zone Plan as amended July 2012 and with the City of Dickinson Comprehensive Plan, as well as being in the interest of public health, safety, and welfare.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Second. And we'll put Dukart on a second. Any further discussion? I'd like to make a comment that it's good to see this, and we wish you well. No further discussion. All those in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Recommended. Thank you very much. Second item on our regular agenda is a preliminary plat. To consider a preliminary plat, replat of Riverfront Estates. The site is generally located in the north quarter of Section 10, Township 139, Range 96 West. The site is approximately 18 acres. This time I'd ask the party presenting, please feel free to come.
Chairman and Commissioners, my name is Ryan Rudolph. I represent Riverfront Estates. What we're looking to do is replat 12 of the previously approved lots into 7 new lots, increasing the size from what they were previously platted based on requests from buyers of the lots. We've replatted the site to show the changes in the road on Riverfront Drive per Craig's request. And we've also moved the utility locations from the back of the site where they were previously approved to the front based on MDU's requirements and recommendations.
Thank you, Mr. Rudolph. Any questions or comments from Mr. Rudolph?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Rudolph,
Yes.
just, could you maybe clarify, we were going to have a discussion on the items of condition that would be in a development agreement. This would be a good time to have that discussion. And then I have a public comment from one of the existing owner
Okay.
that's out there that there's 7 square feet of, I think you've addressed the density concerns he had, but I think he's owed, per the plat, I guess, 7 square feet. I don't know if that is going to be resolved, but I mean, I think it's a technicality, but I think it should be addressed.
Yes, there are a couple things with the development agreement. We'd asked for an extension for the replacement of Riverfront Drive based on economic changes and times and sales. We'd like 2 years, we'd like a year, just some extension because of the sales. There is the 7 square feet of land that Mr. Hadley talked about. When we replatted where the existing road went, there's just a little sliver of land. We're planning on either selling or giving that land back plus additional land to the homeowners that I think own that property. So I think they brought it up just as a question, but they'll end up getting a larger section of land, which they want, they'll take care of. I've already discussed it with them. And then I think lighting was, the new lighting plan was the only thing that was brought up. And I believe our previously approved road plans and city engineering plans don't show any lighting required on that road. I don't know if that's gonna be a new requirement or not. When Fifth Street actually is installed, that will be the main thoroughfare. We're taking River Drive and diving it into the middle of the cross section, so it doesn't become a racetrack for people going down Fifth Avenue. Hopefully with this construction, and eventually when Fifth Street gets extended over to Sixth Avenue, it'll make it a straight shot. Lighting will probably be placed on Fifth Avenue as the main thoroughfare.
Yeah, my only comment on the lighting was it wasn't included in the street plan. It was condition or a requirement in the development agreement for the original plat of Riverfront Estate. So
Okay.
the lighting requirements have changed, but the requirement to have lighting was always a part of the development.
Thank you, Mr. Booth. Any other comments or questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Jackson.
to back up a little bit, are you going to be requesting any rezoning?
No, there's, I think there was some confusion when we put in the
Okay.
plat. We had the large section that's unplatted. When we put in the permit, it asked how many houses. I put 30, assuming 20 would be on that large section and these 10 houses. So, yeah, that's
So this will still be one home per lot?
per lot, correct.
Okay.
So those 10 lots will be 10 custom, they're larger custom homes that are going on those lots. Per our, not development agreement, but our building requirements, they
Okay.
need to be larger houses, stone on the front, nicer houses along that
Okay.
River Drive.
Then the other question I have, I don't remember the detail for sure. You guys have kind of alluded to it, but in the original plating, the development agreement addressed street construction as to what that was going to consist of prior to building permits, or as a certain amount of building permits were issued, and when that would happen and all. And I don't see that requirement in these conditions. I assume that the previous requirement will follow this replat, and if so, I would think it should be named, or it should be written again into this DA.
And we're fine with the requirements, we're just asking for an extension of time with those requirements being put into place.
And that's probably reasonable. Can you tell us what those requirements are?
I believe it's 5 lots. After 5 lots are road crossings for utility service, the 5 lots are put in. It kicks in that the road then needs to be replaced. I believe it was 2000, by November of 2016, if 5 of them were in place, then the road had to be done. Otherwise, it was by November of 2017, the work had to be completed. So
And that's 5 houses constructed?
5 permits with road
Building
crossings. With the road, so once we install 5 road crossings is when that kicks in, that the entire road needs to be taken down and replaced.
Mr.
Okay.
Rudolph, that's your recommendation to change the development agreement. The original development agreement was constructed by 2015. If 5 permits were drawn in 2015, which they weren't, or by, we'll say, the end of this construction season, 2016. So your recommendation is to slide it.
A year or 2, or whatever we can do to give us the opportunity to sell some of the lots to finance it.
Okay, my concern is, you know, you may only have the 5 or 4 with building permits or whatever, but you may have sold all the lots. How is the city guaranteed that this street work is going to happen?
If we will put it in after, if we sell all the lots, we'll put it in right away. It's not a question of that. It was the 5 with the street crossings going across is what kind of kicked it in, and then there was if that doesn't happen, it needs to be completed by this date. So we're fine with that if we can just slide it a certain time period. So whether or not the houses are sold or there's road crossings within a 2-year time period, there was a kick-in date that it had to be complete regardless of how many houses or road crossings were in place in the original development.
If I could address that a little bit too, I think you could work on a, a timeframe that would be acceptable to extend the date if that's what you're wanting to do, but also at that same time, have a bond kick in that would have the construction of the rest of the infrastructure that wasn't in place, bonded for. That way, if whatever, there are no more lots sold and it doesn't move forward, then the city could pursue having those improvements put in based on that bond. So we definitely could have that in the development agreement.
Well, that's what I'm asking. I'm not sure what the right answer is, but
Right.
that's the concern I have, is that, you know, I certainly understand you have the intent to do that right now, but I know things change. And with the environment we've got right now, things are changing.
I think it would be more than reasonable that through 2016, I think that was Craig's recommendation, that you stick with the 2016 construction timeframe and then bond if it has to go beyond that. I don't know that Craig said bonding, but don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think that would be an option that we could actually explore to ensure that those improvements get put in. And then the last thing I had is, in your packet, it does show, there was some confusion. I think Mr. Rudolph just had their ultimate goal of numbers of lots. I actually show on the plat, little copy here, where the future development area, it's across the street. So we were trying to lump that density all into that one area, and that obviously wasn't where it was going.
So, Mr. Rudolph, you want to put an agreement out a couple years, that if nothing is built, that say in 2 years, or whatever, you're gonna have to come to some firm date,
Yes,
that whatever count it is, that you put a road in,
correct,
no matter what.
correct.
And is that your understanding too, Mr. Kupas, that could be agreed upon, you think, and put in the agreement? That whether or not anything is built, or 1 or 2 homes, or they're all sold, the lots, that there's a time frame when the road has to be put in, whether nothing is built or not.
Absolutely, that's how the original one was a year ago,
Mhm.
gave them till the end of this year. I felt it was appropriate to keep that deadline of end of year 2016 for this construction. If we want to move it out to end of year 2017, you know, that's something we can sure put in the development agreement. But there should be a drop dead date regardless of how the development proceeds, or we'll be dealing with it 10, 20 years down the road. So I think we need to have a drop dead date.
I agree there should be a drop dead date, and I'm fine with you guys negotiating that, whatever it is, with the developer. I'm more concerned, you know, these guys could sell the whole property next week to somebody else. So we need something guaranteeing us that this street is
In
gonna
the
be built.
In the original development agreement, as well as city ordinance, we require a surety bond or some form of surety. So that will be something that we'll
Okay.
absolutely enforce in doing this revision.
Good enough.
So it sounds like you can come to an agreement with the city, and that will be in the agreement, the development plan, before it goes forward.
Okay.
Are there any other items on this that you'd like to discuss at this time?
The only other thing I want to just remind everybody is it's preliminary plat, so they will be coming back in with a final DA and a final review of it. So we'll hammer out those details, and Craig will review whatever the construction costs are for the bond, and that will be in front of you before it comes to you again for a final recommendation on the final plat.
Thank you. Mr. Rudolph, do you have any other comments?
That's it, thank you.
Any other questions, Mr. Rudolph? Comments? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This time I'd ask if there's anyone in the public who'd like to make comment on this preliminary plat, please feel free to come to the podium. Anyone on the commission wish to make further comment? Being none, we'll close the public portion of this hearing, and I'd ask for a motion on this preliminary plat. Not sure what we're just approving because we're coming back to it again anyway, but
Mr. Chairman, I'll move we approve the preliminary plat with the conditions recommended by staff and with the proper guarantees on the street construction.
I'll second that.
And a second by Mr. Elkin. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Preliminary plat recommended. Item 3 on our regular agenda is a zoning code amendment. Amendments to consider amendments to the zoning text in Chapter 39 zoning under the following sections: 39.10 sign regulations. Mr. Hadley or Mr. Josephson?
Actually,
Would like to-
it's Attorney Goss will be.
Attorney, would you like, good. There won't be any questions then.
So we discussed this at the last meeting. There was a U.S. Supreme Court case that came out last year saying that in sign regulations, you cannot regulate the content. So it has to be content neutral regulations. And so the changes made to this are just to reflect that. So some of the things that you'll notice where we had things like grand opening sales, special events, realty signs, things like that, we can limit the times or locations where signs are to reflect that that's really our intention, but we cannot say it has to be a real estate sign, because then we're saying that content is what can be on there. So those changes are made for real estate, was changed to say temporary signs posted on property that is actively marketed for sale or rent. So it is a realty sign, but essentially somebody, if their house is for sale, they could post a sign that doesn't say for sale, says something else on it, just not limiting the content. So all of these follow that Supreme Court case to not limit that content, and staff would recommend approval, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions at this time for Jennifer? Comments? And I think we tried to reflect that when we talked about digital signs, several years ago. Seemed like a long time ago, but that the city wasn't in the business to in any way restrict what people advertise. But the companies who own the signs, they could.
Right.
It's their business to restrict what they put on the sign. So this is separate totally from that no one can say that because we limit the number of signs or the placement of the sign, we're giving up the right to restrict what's on them to the private company. They can do that.
Right, so it just goes back to freedom of speech, essentially. You can't limit the content of it. So that's what this goes to, just the government regulation of the speech. So we can limit the time and places, but not the actual content.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Hadley, Mr. Josephson, are you completely satisfied with this?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and we thank Attorney Goss for taking it on and resolving it.
Thank you. Is there anyone in the public who would like to make comment on this zoning code amendment? Feel free to come to the podium. Would you like to make comment, ma'am? No? Anyone in the commission? Closed public portion of this. Is there a motion to approve?
Also move.
And a motion to approve. Is there a second? Any further discussion? If being none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried. Recommend approval. Thank you very much, Ms. Ellis.
Thank you.
Anything else anyone would like to bring before the commission this time? If not, we're going to go to a work session, and this is open to the public for their hearing. This is still part of a public meeting. We have two items, all commercial zone district design standards and an ETZ rezonings. And this time I'd ask, who would like to head this?
I'm going to visit with you on the commercial design standards first.
Okay?
What I'd like to start out with, I'm going to pass around, I'm sure you folks have all witnessed the Burger King remodel. And I just made one copy to just pass it on, but, you know, right now, the way our standards are written, those folks would not have to have met our design criteria because they weren't doing more than 50% of improvement to the structure. I did visit with them. They wanted to be a good neighbor and a good part of the community. They decided to go ahead and meet the intent, and it's a good way to kick off this second discussion on this, just because I think that's the kind of neighbor and that's the kind of folks that we probably want to promote, and the kind of design standards. They didn't think that it was out of the ordinary or too expensive to actually do, because they just penciled it into their remodel plan. Is it perfect? No, it doesn't have the decorative lighting that, you know, and some of the landscaping. I mean, you know, but they have stepped out and said that they would go ahead and upgrade their exterior facade to incorporate what they wanted to do and what we see as a vision. Because what I did was explain to them that as development happens around them, this is what it's going to look like. And they wanted to fit in with that. Had similar conversations with Walmart. They're the architect that's going to be doing 3 to 5 years, they're going to be doing a exterior upgrade to the Walmart here. It's on their board to go ahead and do that too. They actually, they should have probably had a little more improvement if it was in place, and I didn't know. I didn't research to see if this was in place when Walmart was built. But I guess, you know, we had a little bit of a discussion, and there was some pros and cons back and forth last month on design standards and requiring them in all commercial zones. Before you, on the map there, and I thought it would be washed out too much, and I think I'm right if it was projected, the areas that you see that are darker, that are colored on that map, there would be the reddish orange on the podium there, basically show the areas of our corridors. The light orange areas are areas that are not included in the corridor overlay districts that we're talking about that this amendment would affect. And I'm going to hand one down. I'm going to hand one down with just the commercial zones, and then one with this same representation on it, just so you can look at. And with that, I'd just like to continue the dialogue from last month. I'm hoping that you've got to go out and drive around a little bit, look at some of our commercial areas, and then imagine, we require this 300 feet from the right-of-ways depicted on that as far as the standards being built. Now, if you're 305 feet away from that, you don't have any standard that you're building to. And if you're within a commercial zone, that does affect property values, it does affect the aesthetics, it does affect the investment for the properties adjacent that had to do that. Yes, it does save you money if you're just outside of that zone, but I just think that, you know, this is a good time to have a dialogue of what our actual goals are for the city. I mean, do we want to have some continuity? We just got done with the urban forestry meeting. You know, our decorative lighting, I'm going to touch on real quick at the end of this meeting. They're all pieces that tie this community together overall. And whether it's commercially, residentially, lighting, infrastructure improvements. I think that it's just a very good time for us to just step back and say, what do we see and what do we want for our community? I mean, it shouldn't be based on dollars and cents. It really should be based on our standards are not costly to implement on buildings. Yes, they do cost more than just doing a metal pole building facility. They definitely do. But, you know, if companies will automatically volunteer to do it, I can tell you it's not going to be a burdensome thing on most folks. Yes, that's not an answer for everyone. I'm sure there will be people that say, yes, this is going to be add a little more cost, and I may not want to do the project because of that. A good current example, KMM, you know, it's a great facility. It's a great business to have in Dickinson. You know, everyone knows that they're putting an addition on their facility and adding some parking, what have you. They're exempt from the standards. They're in the overlay zone. They don't meet the percentage requirements, and they don't intend on upgrading their facility. So in my opinion, I think, and I have encouraged them to, and I think they've just chosen that they don't want to do that. Now, I think as a community, you know, that really is a great example of what we need to look at and say, would we want that to be upgraded to a similar fashion to, say, Burger King did? So I think that, you know, those are two great examples, and it's not, KMM is doing everything that they were required to do. You know, it's not knocking their operation or their development plans, but it's a great example of a facility that is thriving, moving forward, adding on, and they're choosing not to do those standards because they can. So I'd kind of like to hear your thoughts. I think everybody was going to drive around. Earl was the only one that probably didn't hear that you're supposed to drive around and look at the commercial areas. Just kind of like to get a little feedback and have a dialogue on that.
Well, I did drive around yesterday, all the way from Idaho, and I stopped in Billings for an ice cream cone. And I don't know who put the standards in to this little development. Hopefully it wasn't the city imposing something on these people, the way they had to put these berms and signage in to get in and out of just getting myself vanilla cone dipped in chocolate. It was like, this is ridiculous. If the developer did this, you know, shame on them for business practice. But if the city imposed upon them, I don't think it was correct. But as far as, you know, yeah, some of these standards, I think, you know, they're good, but I don't think we can cover everybody. There's going to be those outliers, those people that don't want to do it and know they don't have to do it and are going to be outside the limit, and they're, you know. But I think, I agree with you, like most of them, if there's not much of a cost in it, and, you know, they can see the benefit, and if it's a good business model to start with, they're probably going to think it's the thing to do in the long run. That it's going to be a benefit for them in the long run, really. So, but yeah, I did not get to drive around much.
I'm sure you drove around a few times in town.
Mr. Chairman,
Jackson.
I have a question. I'm confused. In our corridor overlay district, the requirements we currently have, do they apply to all zoning designations or not?
They apply. They apply, but if it's a 50%.
No, I understand that part. You know, I understand that part, but regardless of whether it's industrial or the various commercial zoning designations, does our corridor overlay district apply to all of them?
Yes, and I don't know if it, Stephen, you could help me with this, residential, because there's a number of residential.
Residential is exempt.
Steve Josephson, City County Planner. No, if the corridor standards call out that residential and agricultural are exempt, my understanding of when the corridor standards were adopted, there was a desire that along major roadways and, you know, gateways into the community, especially on 22, that you don't have a solid steel wall, you know, a solid metal wall of buildings coming in. And hence the commercial structure, the commercial standards, you know, the commercial standards were, you know, were adopted, so at least it broke up the pattern of what
Okay.
those buildings look like.
That's not what I'm asking though, Steve.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if it applies, whether my property is zoned community commercial,
Yes.
industrial, heavy
Yes.
commercial, it applies to all
It
those?
applies to all of those.
Okay, okay.
That was just a little background on the
Yeah.
district from what I understand. But yes, it would apply to all of those zoning districts.
You know, the 50% conversation is one thing. It's probably fair to discuss that. I would agree with that. There's also been discussion in the past about whether 300 feet should be 400 feet or, you know, whatever, and that's a grab. I know when we did this, this was specifically done to protect our gateways. That was the compelling reason to do it, to make our entrances and our arterials in the city more dressed up, if you will, whatever the right term is. I find myself hesitating to apply it to all areas. Even though personally I'd like to see that, I don't know at what point it becomes overreach by a city, and that gives me a little bit of pause. So I don't know how everybody else feels. I do see one other thing on here, that if we make some revisions in this ordinance, we should get 30th Avenue on here. 30th Avenue isn't, and it shows up on your map, it's missing on 30th Avenue. So we should add 30th Avenue, but that's a detail thing. So I don't know how the rest of you feel. Yeah, in a perfect world, I would like to see it in all commercial and industrial areas, but I just don't know if that's appropriate for us to go that far with it.
Now that you said that, it was seemed like the major intent was to protect the entrances in the city, the east and west and north and south, the gateway.
It was, and I think, you know, that was done in the heat of the moment when things were going crazy here in Dickinson, and we wanted to get this ordinance in. So tweaking it now, I think is fine. If 50% should become 30%, or, you know, I think that's a fair discussion. If 300 feet should become 400 feet, I'm open to that. But to do a blanket thing, that's what's making me hesitate a little bit.
Just one thing to to think about. I think on the percentage, and that's why we're discussing it, because this is a good time to discuss it when we don't have a room full of folks that are trying to do that, because there's nothing worse than trying to update these kind of standards when people are trying to build them. So yeah, it's a valid discussion whether we do anything or whether we change it all. I think that if someone has a desire to change the exterior of their building, in my opinion, I think that it should meet those standards. I don't necessarily think that it should be, if it requires a building permit to change the exterior, I would highly suggest, because you know, otherwise you're probably never going to get in those corridors. You're never going to get consistency along those existing corridors if we, you know, don't change anything there, because there's always going to be a number of places that play that play that card, if you will, that, you know, and that's fine if that's what you see as far as the direction of where the community wants to go. I just think that that's why we're discussing it, because it's it's not an easy topic, and it's not a fun topic, but it is something that, in the long term, you will have benefits from it. You do come from areas that every exterior design, every building in a commercial zone had to go through an exterior design review that literally would come to yourself, and they would review, so I'm not saying that we need that. And I think that, there's some sort of a fine line in between where we're going, what we desire, and what we have currently on the books. And I think what we have currently on the books, although it's much better than what you had, which was nothing, I think that the direction might be that maybe we, if nothing else, if we don't change the boundaries, that's fine. I would definitely highly suggest that we change a percent down to, I would suggest down to any alteration that requires a building permit, myself. But, so, we could have that discussion. If we do that, we will catch and upgrade a lot of facilities in these corridors that otherwise we will miss in the next 5-10 years.
And is there a easy way of figuring out what point you get where it's cost prohibitive for the business if you change the percentage?
Well, I think if you leave it up to them, I mean, honestly, if I have a building in that corridor and I decide that I really just want to paint it and put a new sign up and do some minimal and maintenance type things, you would never be required to do it. But if you were going to put a new entry in and going to do some work to it on your choice, you're in control of that choice and that budget, at that point. So you'd be able to then decide how much it was going to cost you to do that. So I'm not saying that folks can't go out and do, the general upgrades and maintenance and changing the color from brown to green or whatever, and doing those kind of things. I'm saying major structural stuff that needs a building permit.
So
That's a good trigger. I mean, that's a good trigger point that we actually have, and we aren't making folks do that. They're actually doing it by their choice.
I think too, it'd be good to look at the percentage, discuss that,
Uh,
get some good input on that. If that might be.
And I would say, I really don't want to jump into this with a solution, immediately. I really would like all of you to drive around and envision that. I mean, literally drive down 22.
Well,
drive
maybe
down the
a-
business loops.
A vivid example maybe would be on South Highway 22. Think about that. We've got a lot of small businesses on both sides, especially the east side, that are plain metal buildings. So what we're suggesting is that anything that they would do that would require a building permit,
On the exterior, for the exterior,
that they would have to dress the exterior up.
right. Not interior remodel,
No, I did drive down.
exterior.
I did drive down 22 the other day, and I actually was surprised. And I think all of it's been done totally by the private business owners or residents. That there's a much, seems more visually acceptable than it used to be. I mean, it looks fairly decent as you go down there compared to what it was 10 years ago. And I think that's all been on the part of the owners themselves doing that. They see it's good for business, and the businesses that are there now, they realize that it's good for their own business.
I know there's danger in picking out certain properties, but another one I'd think about would be 21st Street east of Highway 22. Some of the businesses on the north side. So is that important to us? Do we try to be more demanding that those are dressed up.
That's actually already, Gene, that's actually already in that overlay.
I understand, but the percentage
Oh, the
issue
percentage
would
issue,
still
yep.
apply.
Yep. That'd be
So
good.
you're saying you would, it's at 50% now,
Mhm.
and you would ideally like to go to maybe 30?
Mhm.
Is that what you're saying?
He's saying
Some number
zero.
like that?
He's saying 0.
0.
Yeah,
I struggle with that. I really do. In a perfect world, I think that would be great. And, 2, 3 years ago, money, I don't want to say wasn't an object, it was, but it wasn't nearly the issue it is today. And who knows if we're going to get back to that, and I don't know.
But the primary thing we were after when we passed this ordinance was new buildings, new construction.
And I don't have a problem with that, not at all. It's the existing ones. If they want to expand or something I realize at that time that would be the time to do it all, but it certainly is going to come at a cost. And some of these places may need to expand, but, not necessarily spend any more than they have to. And I know where you're coming from as well. I mean, it would make it look nicer, but I just don't know if we should be doing that. I mean, to me, at the very least, I would like to leave it at 50 rather than drop it, or to 0, or then go to 0, or whatever the case might be. Yes, I'm sure there's going to be a few that will try to skirt around it, but who knows what their reasoning is for it. You mentioned KMM. There maybe is a reason why. I mean, you would think they would want to, but there's probably a perfectly good reason why they're not. And I don't know that that's up to us to decide that. That's just my opinion. I mean, would I like to see them all updated and look newer? Of course, everybody would. There's no doubt about that. But to require them to do it,
Well, we're requiring it now.
I know,
At
at 50,
50%.
but I'm talking to make it even more stringent. To me, at the very least, I would say leave it at 50, or most, however you want to put it.
Well, I think we need to have those discussions. I think that's important. That should be looked at,
I would be open to maybe a slight decrease. I don't think I would be open to taking the percentage out of it. In other words, anything that requires a building permit. I don't think I'd be open to that.
Ms. Dukart.
I'd just like to add a little bit to that too. We are trying to train the public, whether you're a business owner or private owner, to update your premises all the time, because, life changes every 3 seconds, and we tell them, you may not think about selling your property today, but what if something happens and you have to sell it tomorrow or next week? They really need to keep their properties, especially on the exterior, for curb appeal. And they do, if they have the funds for it, that's the first thing they're doing, is trying to update the exterior versus the interior. And the appraisal people are more demanding because of loans. If you need a loan, and most people do when they're buying the property, they're real stringent now on the exterior. As far as lead-based paint, that is the biggest one. And most of those buildings were built probably before '78. On 21st for sure, and then Highway 22. I have another concern too. I wasn't on planning and zoning, and I don't know if we were part of the Roars edition. I know they did their own infrastructure because I was on the city commission at the time. But I drive around the city a lot, and those manholes out there they're like life-threatening. You're dodging manholes. Now, how did they get that by? I don't know.
That's a real, that's a mystery, Mr. Kovacs, isn't it?
And that is such a highly traveled road with Menards. And now with all the new houses going up, I don't know if any of you have driven out to Westridge. There's a lot of new houses going up there. Venture's putting, you know, quite a few up. Legend is putting Kuntz, and then we have Seacrest. That is a highly driven area right now, and I think we have to think about who's responsible for that. I hope it wasn't us.
You know, and I mean, that's a good point. I'm sorry, Mr. Kupas, I meant to say Mr. Kupas, but it's like, okay, we would like certain buildings to be upgraded if they spend so much money in doing something, and they'll have to do it. But when someone does their own infrastructure, like Roars did on that road, now, who's responsible? The same type of responsibility that a property owner has to upgrade and have it look a certain way, whether it's a concrete or a paved driveway or an entryway that they never had before. And now we've got just as bad a thing as driving on a road. That's not good. So where does the responsibility lie? On the public part of it. We as the public should also take on the responsibility of having things functionally and looking good. That road now, is there a responsible party for that?
Yeah, I think you're looking at them. We, that street was constructed in 2013. The project was reviewed by the city after construction. There was a warranty period, as there is on every street, whether the city constructs it or a developer constructs it through their contracting forces. They did make repair work to those utilities in 2014. I think even actually some in 2013. In 2014, beyond the warranty period, we had them attempt to correct those settlements again in 2015, and I believe the city is looking at some of those manholes Ms. Dukart talked about earlier, and are going to be making some repairs in 2016. It's really unfortunate that that happened, but there's from the records that we had, the city wasn't out inspecting those projects. The developer's engineer was, developer's contractor. And we need to change the way we do those types of projects, no doubt. So we're looking into them. It's a safety hazard right now.
That situation, along with a number of others
Yeah.
in town, where it was a casualty of the pace of things.
And in that case, for those that have been here long enough, we kind of get used to driving,
Yeah.
weaving through there, you know, and it's kind of fun if you got a little sports car, but.
But we digress.
Yeah, so my point was, okay, we have a problem with the city looking right, or doing the right thing. And here we're trying to look at a percentage that private has to do right, if they're gonna do something. So it's like, if we want everyone to look a certain way, we should also, the city should, but
And that's the intent.
that's the intent. But surely, I think you have a good point. If money matters, and it does to most people, and I think good business practice realizes that, yeah, you keep your property up, it attracts people, they'd rather come into a place for whatever reason it is, if it looks acceptable or more acceptable than not. And most people, those values are pretty close to the same as far as what's appealing. But they should have the right also to be individuals. Have it look the way they want it. But should we, is there a consensus? I think we should, well, there is. If someone feels the need to send Mr. Hadley and Mr. Josephson more information or viewpoints on the 50%. Make sure you do. And with that, Mr. Hadley, would you like to continue?
Stephen has the next one, and
Okay.
you know, I would like to, you know, next month, if nothing else, give us a final direction, or if you're willing to give us a final direction now on this, just so we're not going down this road of no return as far as,
Well, I think we should let everyone give you any further inputs
okay.
by then.
We'll put it on there for next month, and
We'll
maybe not
do-
talk about it for 2 hours, but
Yeah,
we'll
right.
at least get a direction.
Thank you.
One other site that actually volunteered to do it, that just came to mind that's outside of it, you're talking about Westridge there, Cornerstone Bank. They weren't required to do it either, but they chose to. And the good part of Westridge, if you look at that map, is not required to do it. Now, I think they have their own covenants, I'm sure, that require them to do something. I don't know, I'm not familiar with what their covenants say they need to do, but a good part of that is not included in it.
Is Cornerstone Bank having a grand opening today?
They are, I believe.
I think that's it.
The commissioners, the only note I wanted to add was that recently the city commission did expand the limits of this is from the code as it currently appears online, and about a month ago or so, city commission did approve amendment to the zoning ordinance that added other areas subject to these requirements. And I believe Commissioner Jackson, that 30th was one of those. I can get that information to you. I believe so. I'll get that to you. I'll get that information to you after. But there were a number of ones that were added. What I had, Steve Josephson, City County Planner, what I have before you is the last year when the extraterritorial zone expanded, there were a number of properties that were previously in the unincorporated county that are now fall within the extraterritorial zone and hence within the city's zoning authority. Currently, they've got, the zoning districts that are showing up here are the zoning districts that are, under the county's, the county's code, and those properties ought to be rezoned so that they reflect the something comparable, comparable to the city. And I've got to tell you, this is the first time that the ETZ has expanded since I've been here. It would seem that the city needs to take an action and rezone those properties to something that would be appropriate under the city's zoning ordinance. I guess one of the things I'm here for is to, any expertise or how this was handled in the past. It would seem to me that, we need to go through public hearing process in order to change those, those zoning districts. And I'm just here to solicit some comments before we proceed.
It's been so long since we've had any ETZ expansion until the last 4 or 5 years here, or whatever. It's been years since we've had any ETZ expansion. So to talk about precedent, I don't know if it's a valid conversation even. And I don't know how Jay feels, but the ETZ thing is a difficult thing with enforcement issues between city and county. It gets gray in so many cases. But if the city is really ready to enforce zoning, then I would say, yeah, we should clean it up and apply city zoning to what's in the ETZ, if we're really ready to do the enforcement of that zoning.
And that's been the problem all along, is the enforcement of any of this when it comes to zoning issues. We lay out the policy, but there's no follow-up in the end. We have problems out in the county no matter where we go with some of these subdivisions. And there hasn't been any follow-up to make sure they're done right. And I really don't know what's going to change here. Some of these subdivisions are, my feeling is, the one west of town that we're talking about, that's a very nice subdivision, with and put together. Now, some of these older subdivisions, we'd be happy to gift them to the city. And let the city take over everything.
Nothing,
Regards to 'em.
nothing much is gonna change, and that's the thing, is just picking a zoning district that would be, that would be appropriate, where the lot size is similar and the development standards are similar, and are similar. I can say this, and I know our building department isn't here, I know that we have had instances where people have, have had zoning, have reported zoning code violations, and our code enforcement has gone out, and addressed it, and written letters, and have had people take corrective actions. It has happened, I can tell you that.
So what really changes, Steve, or Gene? Maybe you can answer that. What
Well,
really are the big
I
changes?
can't imagine that we can really anticipate all the changes, but some things that come to my mind, I mean, so much will be grandfathered,
Yeah.
that it won't change a lot of it. But I can see in a residential subdivision, for example, if somebody wanted to build an outbuilding, maybe the limitations of square footage are different between county and city zoning codes. That would just be an example.
They're not. They
Okay,
aren't.
well,
They
then
are.
it's not a very good example.
Yeah, but it's one to bring up because it's a little things.
But things
It's a little
like
thing
that.
such as that. It's a little thing such as that might be different, but we'll look
Right.
at the city's code, and the county, what the county zoning currently is, and make recommendations, bring recommendations back to y'all, as to what would be an appropriate zoning district.
But I assume that you guys are committed to enforcement in the ETZ. I mean, there's no question about that, right?
Well, I think there's an unfortunate matter in the paper today that
Right.
I've been dealing with since last October, September, October. There's been significant enforcement out there. It isn't portrayed in the article that way, but that particular site was a full-blown industrial use. We scaled it back because we didn't have conditions of approval or anything I could reference back to of when that started in existence. I used the 2010 aerial photo and made them clean up to the point that they were at the same intensity that they were back then. And they've done that. They've actually done that. It's been a painful, long process, but there's some environmental issues, obviously, that are still going on, and some civil matters that need to be resolved. But from the city's standpoint, we actually did go out and enforce that. I would say the other big one that I have, and Attorney Goss can jump in, we've enforced a number of billboard requirements in our ETZ. For a number of years, you've probably noticed blank billboards everywhere. You see those start filling up because the billboard companies, mid-June, I believe, they have till mid-June, or they will receive a letter that says the offside of the billboard that's blank will need to be removed. So, I mean, I personally have been doing some of the larger enforcement issues, and that would be one of them, that I feel need to be addressed out in the county. Now, if they have 3 non-running vehicles 4 miles from town, I don't necessarily have the time to go and do that at this point, but, I mean, if we're going to do that, yes, I think our regular code enforcement folks should be doing that.
How is it working with, because the county is still doing building permits and inspections, so how's that working? Is there conflict there between those activities?
Well, Stephen can address that, but I think how it's been addressed is that there is now a sign-off for zoning, and Stephen will follow up with that.
So, it's any permits that come in there in the extraterritorial zone, I review them against the city zoning code to ensure that, that they're meeting the requirements of the city's zoning district and dimensional standards and
Okay.
setbacks and
So
so on.
that's working? as
It
far as-
seems to
Yeah,
be,
that's
it
working.
seems to be working. With our commercial developments, we actually do a zoning compliance letter, you know, that goes along with the application. We do site plan review before it goes to, you know, for structural review. And I believe the county has started to do, as part of their duties, their building department is making sure when they do their inspections that they're meeting the site plan requirements.
So really, the issue probably is simply your familiarity, staff's familiarity with two different zoning codes, and then consistency, I suppose. In other words, if we change any one of these, I guess.
And Jay, you're saying that he's got the full support of the county commission now?
Yes,
I mean,
he
as
does.
far as that
Yes.
goes.
I mean, Steve has the full support of the county.
And Gene, you would say that the city commission is,
Well, I think so.
if they're aware of this,
Yeah.
that it's fine?
I mean, I can think of reasons not to, but I
Uh-huh.
think it's the right
Sure.
thing to do. I think it's the right thing to do.
All right, okay, so I can take that as I can take that as a direction to go forward.
Yes.
Make it so.
Mr. Hadley, on the
Thank you.
enforcement issue, now, we addressed that years ago too. And at some point in time, there was not funding, because my suggestion was ridiculous, that we hire someone at that time for $110,000 to do enforcement. Create a special position outside of all the city agreements with different labor groups, that we could do that. And no one felt we had the money to do that, but enforcement, if we're gonna have all the go-between and expand the ETZ and the other issues that have been ongoing even before this, we need enforcement. Do you feel that is important in that?
Most definitely. I think that's one reason why we're now doing an annual review of all the special use permits, PUDs, subdivisions, all of the items that you hear right now. At the end of the year, we do a follow-up, we do a final list, and then we follow up where they are.
And what,
And I think, and honestly, I'm not opposed to, I don't have the time to do all of the smaller items. I have worked with Mr. Kessel and let him know that I'm taking on the larger enforcement issues. So, you know, the billboard companies, the issue up in the subdivision of west of town, northwest of town, those items I'm just going to take and follow through, because I'm used to having, not in North Dakota, but I'm used to having 100 items on an enforcement list to follow up with on a regular basis. So do I think it's important? Yes. And you know, I think the direction for that needs to come from this board, make a recommendation that we become more strict with that, if that's what your direction is, and then the city commission probably has a direction to our regular enforcement folks to, you know, pay as close attention as they possibly can. They're busy too. I mean, they're busy doing what they do, but I think that, you know, we could probably ramp up our enforcement from where
what,
it is.
and what roadblocks do you see there? Are some of the damages or the actions so punitive that people just say, oh, what the heck, I'm not gonna do it?
Well, I really don't think so. I mean, you know, a lot of times enforcement comes down to it's almost a game. You know, you put someone on notice initially. A lot of times I'll get a compliance just by sending a letter or making contact, going out to a site. If they want to ignore me, I don't want to give Ms. Goss another pat on the back, but I will since she's not here. You know, she's very good about following up, and we've been working together on a lot of issues, and she's not opposed to following up and sending a letter from her office, which then again, if they're going to ignore me, they typically don't ignore her. And so you usually get pretty good compliance once you get to that point. You usually wind up with, you know, you can have a 10-page list of enforcement items, and you might only have to take one person to court. But, you know, as anything else, when you take someone to court, you really do have to have a well-documented timeline of, you've tried to work with the folks, you've tried to explain it, you've tried to give them adequate time to resolve it, because if you don't, you will never win. Even if you're right, you won't win if you haven't laid that groundwork down. So we try to do that on all the items that I'm dealing with right now. Now, I don't really have a lot to do with the enforcement for the everyday stuff that is actually run through the building department. So I can definitely help coordinate it, but, you know, the larger items and subdivision items, I mean, I work with Mr. Kubis too. We've kind of come into a plan where we review and follow up with subdivisions and what have you on an annual basis. So we'll just have a little more compliance, close the loop, if you will, for some of the items that maybe have fallen through the cracks when we were very, very busy here.
Thank you, Mr. Abbott. Mr. Josephson, did you have anything more to add?
Yes, just in terms of ETZ zoning enforcement, I know if I get calls, I refer it over to our code enforcement people, and they get back with me and tell me, they go out and inspect the sites. There have been times they've written letters. There have been times where a building permit, was held until the issue was, an issue from, say, a previous development had been resolved. But I found that the code enforcement officers have been, have let me know. There have been times they've come to me and asked me, about things in the ETZ. I have seen the cases where they have written letters to people where there have been violations. So it's not going unnoticed. It's just a matter of, in the case of most code enforcement issues, it's going to be complaint driven. It's going to be based on receiving complaints and then response.
So is there a consensus that we should let Steve muddle through this between the county and the city? And I think he'll keep everybody aware.
Absolutely.
Any things that are conflicting issues, the transparency should be like 100%.
Yes, it requires public hearing, so.
Anything else? Anything else about trees? And they ask for a motion to adjourn both the meeting. There's been a motion to adjourn, or a second? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.